Right, bear with me a second. Bring dashboard up. People on. Right, 5 minutes at the moment. Right, Chris, I'm just going to get started. Obviously, people just dial in as we do the intro, etc. So, right.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, and thanks for joining today's webinar on data security for Microsoft Office 365 and email cloud applications. My name is Shona Bradshaw. I'm delighted to be joined today by Chris Jones from Forcepoint, who'll be taking you through the bulk of the technical elements of today's presentation. So just a little bit of an agenda first as we go through the webinar. I'll be taking you through a very brief Bytes intro. I will keep it brief, as many of you know us already, and talking about why Office 365 needs some additional data security protection around it. I'll then introduce Chris, who's Forcepoint Cloud Security Specialist, who'll take you through some of the data security challenges with email cloud applications and how Forcepoint's human-centric approach to securing data and making sure data is protected can layer on additional security to provide strong security in the cloud. We will have a Q&A at the end as well, so please do gather up your questions throughout the presentation to pose to Chris at the end. So a little bit of housekeeping to start off. Attendee lines will be on mute throughout the presentation, so please do, as they occur to you throughout the webinar, and post those via the chat or questions box, and I will compare a Q&A at the end for Chris. We will keep discussions today to solutions and strategy. We won't be talking commercials on any of the solutions that are presented in today's webinar. Obviously, those conversations are more than welcome via your account managers at the end of the session. We do have a recording of today's session, which I'll make available to all attendees at the end, so you can review the session at your leisure and share that insight with your teams. And lastly, we do have a feedback survey at the end of all of our webinars. If you could kindly take a couple of minutes to fill that out at the end, that would be greatly appreciated in order to make sure that we continue to deliver the right kind of content on these sessions. So without further ado, quick intro to Bytes, who are we? So we are the security specialist reseller within the Bytes Allied Electronics Group. Our goal is to marry up the agility and insight that you would expect from the smaller specialist reseller partner with the stability and global resources from a large group. We are passionate about delivering technical excellence and expertise to customers on sessions like today, also via our in-house consultancy and support. And we have a vast suite of technical services and solutions wrapped around Forcepoint and other vendor partner solutions to deliver commercial value and technical value to our customers around those solutions that we recommend. We work across the whole spectrum of information security, from the network, next generation firewalling, data security, which is what we're talking to you about today, access and authentication, mobile security, and cloud security. Within all of those areas, what we offer, what we deliver for customers is that technical excellence behind the solution. So we have in-house direct-to-escalation engineer support 24/7. We offer market and technology analysis, security estate reviews, training and knowledge transfer services. So the idea is when you work with Bytes, no matter what solutions that you decide that are right for your business, that we are your support partner, enabling you to get the maximum value from those solutions. So what are we talking about today? So Office 365 is a massively popular tool. It's got fantastic productivity enhancements, and lots of companies are seeking to move their email to the cloud for those reasons. But there are limitations with the built-in security there. And running cloud-based applications with incomplete DLP has ramifications on the actual security of that data in the cloud. Data doesn't stay just in the cloud. It moves between cloud applications. It moves when you migrate to the cloud. And we're speaking with many customers at the moment around how they can ensure the security of their data regardless of whether they have multiple clouds, whether they have a mixture of on-premise and cloud for roaming users, because at the moment visibility and control of data is more critical than ever, particularly with the impending introduction of GDPR and increasing data breach legislation in general. So for that reason, we've asked varied partners to join us for an Office 365 security webinar series, and we've invited our specialist platinum partner as regards DLP, Forcepoint, to speak to you today. We've been working with Forcepoint for many years. We're a top-tier partner of them for over 5 years. And the reason we've asked them to present is that they have a unified human-centric approach to data security, which integrates across web, email, and cloud applications, looking at data security and ensuring data is secure. And so that's why we've asked them to present to you. So without further ado, all that remains for me to do is introduce and pass over to Chris Jones. His specialist knowledge of not just at Forcepoint, but also across the industry of data security and also cloud access security brokerage will hopefully give you some insight as to how you can develop data security around the Microsoft stack. Over to Chris.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Shona. I will just share my screen. So that should be seeing that now.
Yes.
So, yeah, fantastic. So yeah, I'm here to talk about really protecting critical data in Microsoft Cloud. But of course, when we're talking about data and protection, it's quite a broad subject and has quite far-reaching areas as well. So you'll see that there's other parts that are touched on within this. Now, I suppose the agenda for this session, when you were looking to sign up for it, there was a number of talking points that came up, and they're the things that I want to address as we go through this. And there's a number of ways of looking at a lot of these things. But I find if you're thinking about your data, it's about visibility, it's about control. Anytime we start talking about data, immediately there's a lot of compliance and rules and regulations that come into play for that. But of course, when we talk about compliance, that's a bigger, broader subject as well, in terms of how your users even interact and integrate with those sorts of solutions. I find that the exchange online seems to be one of the people's entry ways into Office 365, and whilst there is a level of protection that's offered with that, it's often not enough for organizations. We want to talk a bit around that. And then finally, it's just about making sure that the experience that your users have with Office 365 should feel the same. I don't want you to sit there and think that Office 365 is some totally different part. We want to be able to treat it as part of your network, essentially, so that there's no difference in how your users interact with it or the level of security that they have when they're interacting it, more importantly. So at Forcepoint, we have a number of solutions that we offer in various shapes and forms, and some of them are particularly relevant when we are looking at Office 365 and other cloud applications. And there's the sorts of ones that I want to talk a bit about today. So at a very high level, before I get into the specifics on what we're going to be doing with them, Shona already mentioned our DLP solution, Gartner Magic Quadrant leading solution, and has been for as long as I've been working with the solution, which is about 10 years or so now. And our DLP service has a number of capabilities. Firstly, when we talk about understanding data, we have thousands of predefined compliance templates built into the system that are phenomenally easy to just tick a few boxes and have available for you. So there's any sort of regulatory compliance, and GDPR is probably the really obvious one here. Getting something like that up and running and in place is very, very quick. But where we see some real value from something like a DLP solution is the ability to understand your unique data. Now, whether that's structured information or unstructured information really doesn't matter. If you say, well, this is our core critical information, the DLP solution has the ability to fingerprint that data so that it recognizes that in whatever form or format that takes. And then from there, we can do data discovery to find out where that data exists in the first place, and data loss prevention. And I try and steer away from the term data loss prevention because I think that implies blocking, potentially, which isn't always where organizations go with this. Where I think the DLP and data solutions in general offer a lot of value is about data visibility. So you know what is happening with that key data, and frankly, data education, because it's not just you being educated about where that data is, who's using it, what they're doing with it. It's about educating users as to how they should be using it, because most data breaches are actually accidental because there's a broken business process in place. The next key solution I want to talk about is the CASB solution, the Cloud Application Security Brokerage. And then, for those of you not familiar with this technology, this is almost like an additional security barrier that surrounds any of the cloud applications that you might be using. And there are thousands of different cloud applications, and every organization I speak to has a different view on them. Now, of course, you're going to have a lot of unsanctioned cloud apps that are used, ones that you may not have a problem with people using, but you don't know that they're being used in the first place. So, of course, it can do that sort of discovery and tell you all about what they are. But we're here to talk today quite a lot about the inline features of a CASB solution, where you can say, well, this is a cloud app that we use, Office 365 in this case. What are the security wraparounds that we can do that? What standards can we put in place? And the final part we want to talk a bit about is the web and email security. And in fairness, this is much more around the email security side of things, because as I already mentioned, whilst Exchange Online does offer spam, virus, and threat detection, it's not necessarily at the same enterprise level that people have been used to experiencing with other third-party technology. So to have something that sits in line and does that level of that scanning is often key. Now, breaking down Office 365 use cases, not every organization has the same needs with what they're trying to achieve. Everyone has their own different risk profile. But I find that the conversations tend to fall into one of three areas, and often all of them, but not always. The first one is this whole concept of data protection. So we need to be able to have proper visibility into what data is in there, but also control of the data that's going in and out and how people are using it. With the threat detection, we want to make sure that the security standards that we would insist on having within our own internal network are matched in those cloud environments. So making sure that we have a very strong sandboxing capability, that the spam or virus or threat detection is again at a very, very high level. And even if you've got compromised accounts or malware stored in those environments, can we detect it? Can we mitigate against it? And finally, there's more of a governance compliance side of things. So you again have certain standards as to how your users should act or interact within your local environment. Can you make sure that that standards are maintained and enforced in those cloud environments? You can have privileged users accessing those. Can you manage their rights? Can you manage their access? Can you audit that to the same levels that you might need to do internally? So if I look at the first of those particular points, visibility and control of data. Now, as you can see, there's quite a few of the solutions that have popped up there that are potentially relevant to this. DLP, CASB, the web email security, and also as kind of an optional piece, the Forcepoint UEBA, the user behavior analytics. Now, in all fairness, the most core of these ones that's going to come into play is going to be the DLP solution, because as I already said, the ability to understand compliance, templates and factors like that, the ability to have fingerprinted information, to understand your unique structured and unstructured data is pretty key. So for us to be able to extend into those cloud environments like Office 365 and say, okay, well, what data is in those environments? Maybe through an integration with CASB to do data discovery there. Maybe working locally or with an endpoint to say, well, this data can't even go there in the first place. Maybe integrating with an email gateway so that you have an email gateway in Azure that enables you to scan email that's going in and out of your organization for sensitive content. There's a lot of things that can be done with DLP in terms of its integration, but it all comes back to those core capabilities of really being very good at understanding what that data looks like and being able to recognize it. And then, of course, there's all the controls of that. Do we audit it? Do we notice in notifications? Do we block it? Do we encrypt it? Do we integrate with Microsoft RMS or classification tools? As I said, the CASB can integrate with a full-on DLP solution to enhance data discovery capabilities, but it can also understand your user behaviors. So if you have administrators or even standard users that are linking in with these environments, what are they doing? What are they doing with data? Where are they sharing it? What sort of devices are they using to connect to it? If you're essentially taking data to local environments, that's fine. But if you're taking it to mobile devices, or if it's in a different country, or even moving it from one Microsoft environment to a different Microsoft environment in a different geography, those things might not be what you want. They might be against your compliance rules, even if they are not malicious. And if you were to go with something like the UEBA solution, that integrates with DLP and CASB solutions to really analyze those users' behavior and start to talk about risk profiles. If you were actually deploying this, what kind of implementation flow might you do? How might this look like in a real world? Now, it would probably make sense to start with something like the DLP endpoint, because this is a great all-purpose entry point to DLP, and quite often the place where people stop with DLP because it's really strong and very, very, very capable. But it's going to identify and monitor and control data on the endpoint, including how they are interacting with things like Office 365. So can this type of information go there in the first place? The next point to add on would probably be CASB, because this takes all of those rules from DLP, has that great understanding of fingerprinted data and regulatory compliance data, and allows you to discover what data you've got in those cloud environments, and put controls over those as well, including how people can access that and what they can actually do with it. The next step that you might take would be to add on a module for the DLP service, which would be network-based DLP. Again, this can work on the local environment, but what I'm thinking about here is putting in a DLP gateway in the Azure environment that monitors your email to say, okay, well, if email is going out from our Exchange Online environment containing sensitive data, we want to take a control for that. Now, it's worth bearing in mind, by the way, that the DLP endpoint will integrate with Outlook and with the kind of the web-based equivalent of that for your online Exchange, but that's more of an allow or block or monitor sort of piece. Perhaps you're also wanting to do quarantine or blind copying or rerouting of email, things that are really SMTP focused. Something like a network-based piece, even if it's in Azure, is ideal for that. As a kind of another option, you might use things like our web security hybrid to take those DLP policies and extend those to all of your users via the web client, but also use the web piece to make sure that users' work environments are actually safe regardless of whether they are. And then finally, as I mentioned, you may decide to implement something like the UEBA solution, which it has the ability to examine all user behavior, not just from their devices, but from other third-party systems, and take insights from a lot of different environments, and to help start to build up risk score. And risk score is something you're going to start to see really factor into a lot of Forcepoint technologies over the coming year, as we start to introduce risk-based policies where things start off quite minor, but as their risk score increases, as things start to look a bit suspicious, as we see other external factors happening, that may change or edit policies. It makes it more dynamic and adaptive. So the second piece for the human point system was improving efficacy and protecting against cyber attacks. Now, again, this is going to be a couple of features that are going to be doing really integral for this. CASB and the web and the email security. And if you're reading the text below, you'll see a couple of things pop out there, which is the letters AMD. So this is our advanced malware detection. Now, all of our solutions have real-time scanning involvement. We all use signature-based approaches and our own analytics to detect zero-day malicious content as a standard feature. And we've been doing that very, very effectively for years. The AMD add-on is taking it to a different level, and what we do here with files that we see is put them into our cloud sandbox environment, and from there we can trigger it in a number of different environments and really understand what is happening with that file and with that potential threat, because there's a lot of content out there that is built to try and evade real-time detection and even kind of standard advanced threat detection capabilities. And the only way you'll pick up on it is by using some sort of sandbox capability. So for us, integrating sandboxing capabilities with our web and email gateways allows us to detect those compromised messages as they're going in or out of your organization. If we integrate that with CASB, it means that the CASB device can scan your network shares and your cloud shares and all of those things and say, okay, well, what files have we got there? Are there any files that have been stored there that are actually containing malicious content? And it's actually more common than you would expect. On a different level, CASB can also monitor how the users interact with their data and actually interact with those environments. Because if we start to take some of the user analytics that are included within CASB, that really helps us understand risk profiles. Looking at things like location, their behavior, how they normally interact and integrate with solution, even the rules and policies that you put in place for how administrators, privileged users, standard users might behave. We will see compromised users over a period of time. It's somewhat of an inevitability that something's going to attempt to get into your environment and do something, even if it's potentially quite benign. Having those features as a standard part of CASB saves a lot of organizations. So what's the implementation flow look like from this? So probably an obvious place to start for people is by using those web and particularly in this case, the email gateways. Now our email gateways, I've mentioned a few times we can have them sitting at the Azure side of things as essentially a virtual appliance, or we can have them done at a pure cloud level. So again, there's actually nothing sat locally or even in your Azure environments. But that will provide you with spam and virus filtering at a very, very high level with very, very high SLAs backing it, but that advanced malware detection sandbox integrated within it. The next piece is probably going to be something like the CASB. That's a whole security wraparound piece to understand if there's any malicious files that are stored in those sensitive environments, but also really to make sure that there's nothing happening with your users that could indicate that they've been compromised. So the third and final area that comes up in terms of people's concerns within this is governance and compliance. So how do our human-point systems deal with that? So primarily this is going to be focused on the CASB solution. And you'll have seen this one come up a lot in terms of this, which makes a lot of sense. We are here talking about a purely cloud-based environment. So something that supplies a security wraparound for that makes a lot of sense that we're going to see it. Two other areas that may come in to people's radar, certainly over time, would be something like an insider threat capability or the user behavior analytics. But kind of taking it back to the CASB side of things, because it's effectively a barrier that surrounds cloud applications, and in this case Office 365, but inevitably you're going to have other cloud applications. It allows you to look at that environment, firstly audit anything that's actually happening within it, how all of the users are working within it, but also then to set a security standard of how people work within this. And of course you have this locally. You're going to have things like basic password policy profiles that you need to put in place. Anyone who's got any sort of ISO accreditations or things like that, there are areas that you need to meet internally. Something like Office 365 doesn't necessarily mandate those. And it's all well and good to say, well, we're going to have almost like an HR-driven policy to say, please do these things. We want you to do that. But because if it's not enforced, it's not necessarily going to happen. So a CASB wraparound means that you can identify gaps within the security, but also have that same level of interaction across any cloud environment and the local one. Something that can also be very useful though is if you've got dormant users, orphaned users within the environment, it'll identify those. It'll help you understand what people are doing with it. We've seen some pretty big customers within our CASB save masses of money when they realize that about 10% of all of the people on there are actually abandoned, orphaned users. So it can be useful to actually help save that sort of money. And then finally, if you're looking at your privileged users, making sure that we have an extra kind of level for them, they're the people that have kind of the biggest risk associated to them, because they have a lot more interaction and a lot more potential to do harm. So we really want to keep control over them. So implementation flow from this one should be reasonably straightforward, because the vast bulk of what we're talking about here would be something that's driven by CASB. By the way, as I'm going through this, whilst I am separating it down into features in terms of what might be useful for you, from a licensing perspective, none of this really has the same level. If you were buying CASB, it would actually cover all of the use cases that we've discussed under the same license. It's not that you need to buy a different license to cover compliance and governance versus the data versus the security side of things. The clients, the CASB, as I said, is going to identify those compliance gaps. It's going to make sure you've got that level of security for both your standard users and your privileged users across the board. It also should be able to help you identify users that just aren't interacting with the solution and potentially help reduce your license costs. Now, as I said, you could take this a step forward and add in other solutions from a compliance perspective. Now, this may be a bit overkill for certain organizations, but it's worth thinking about this, because even if it's not of value or interest to you now, things are changing, and this is absolutely the way that we see the market going. So for you to know that these capabilities are there should you need to add them on, and with us, a lot of them are going to become integrated and just standard features. Things like the UEBA capabilities to understand user behavior analytics and put an analytical wraparound from this to understand that is going to become critical. And even something like inside a threat, being able to monitor privileged users, being able to monitor specific environments. And again, it's risk-based, again, it's analytic-based. So this and UEBA tie in really nicely together. So last couple of bits before I wrap up now. So I've gone through what I think is a lot of the use cases and how people might use Forcepoint solutions with Office 365. But at the same time, if we're talking about these, what is this actually bringing to the table? How many of these things are absolutely new to us? And I say us in terms of you when you're interacting with Office 365. How many of these are more of an extension to what you already have, or would be just improving what that is? And actually, how many of them already exist within Office 365 in some shape or form, but you may decide that they're not sufficient for what you need and you need to swap them out. So in terms of the new features, these all come from the CASB side of things. It breaks down into two areas. And that's the inbuilt user behavior analytics that the CASB solution provides. The ability to understand how your users work and how they interact with the data. Being able to have a very high level view of that can be really very, very useful for organizations, because it will detect compromised accounts. Because if people's behavior changes, if something becomes different, that is a big hallmark of those of cyber attack accidentally happening. It's also making sure that only the legitimate users or the legitimate scenarios have got the access to Office 365, which then goes double for our privileged users. And we want to be having a lot of controls and security for everybody, but the privileged users are the ones that really provide us with the biggest risk, because theoretically they know where everything is within there. So having risk adaptive control, so that if things change within their environment, if something different, then suddenly actually their privileges change. In terms of adding value, again, these are things that exist within Office 365, but how can we help improve them? So we've got a very good integration with the Azure information protection piece. So we can integrate with RMS protected files so that everything is consistently applied. You've got a DLP policy that isn't having to miss things because effectively they're protected and can't get into them. If you're using any sort of data classification piece, we can leverage that, and we can use our DLP policies to further push that out. And that also helps if you've already done some sort of classification exercise, because our solution, being more of an enterprise DLP solution, is likely to be more accurate. We can rescan those capabilities, and we can rescan things that have potentially been missed to make sure that everything does have the correct classification piece. Again, looking at some kind of CASB features, making sure from a compliance perspective, that Office 365 meets your minimum standards and that your users have the same interaction with it, but also from a licensing perspective. Are you using the right amount of licenses? Do you have too many? Do you have too little? And there are certain features where we would say that you may want to actually totally replace what Microsoft has to offer. Again, all of these are optional, and as I said at the start, different users have different risk profiles and different concerns. But something like the Exchange Online is the one I see come up a lot. So many people who have gone from using standalone and third-party spam type solutions and then move to Office 365. And whilst it does provide something, it's not always sufficient for what everybody is used to. So putting in a third-party buffer on top of that is critical. And then adding in something like the advanced malware detection at sandbox level, again, gives you the level of protection that you would expect on your normal environment. Doing that same piece with the CASB piece, so that we are able to scan any file that's stored in those SharePoint drives, OneDrive, anything like that, and again, sandbox and make sure they're safe. And then finally, the enterprise class DLP. And again, this is one that for some organizations is absolutely critical, and for others is less of a concern, because Microsoft does offer a kind of DLP capability within their system. For some people, that's going to be enough. For others, it's absolutely not sufficient, because maybe they need to do more than just some basic regulatory compliance. Maybe they need a higher level of accuracy to reduce false positives. Quite likely, what they actually want to be able to do is fingerprint their unique information, because that's something that the Office 365 capabilities aren't going to do. It's not going to understand what's unique to you. It's only going to understand generic compliance sorts of templates. And that's where our enterprise class DLP can come into play. And it's worth remembering, and I really want to stress this point, that even if you do think that the DLP in Office 365 is sufficient, it only covers that particular environment. It doesn't cover anything else you have. It doesn't cover your local environment. It doesn't cover any other cloud applications that you'll use with. Something like our DLP solution, it just treats Office 365 and anything else as an extension of your network. So you have one policy management place, one area to do reporting, one area to do incident investigation. You're effectively dealing with a single environment, and Office 365 just happens to be an extension of that. It's not treated any differently. Okay, so really want to summarize everything that I've gone through now. So what are the solutions that effectively bridge the perceived security gap in Office 365? So straight away, very, very obvious one is inbound and outbound protection for your online exchange, whether that be from something as simple as spam, or real-time threat detection across the bat, or even some of the really advanced stuff like the sandboxing piece. Being able to do data discovery across not just your local environments, but all of your cloud environments, including Office 365, enables us to understand what your attack surface is and what risk you're actually open to, because how much data do we have there? Do we have data stored there that shouldn't be there in the first place? Because we can understand where the data is, we can also understand what people are doing with that data. So we can start to put rules and policies in place with how people interact with data, not just locally or with things going into Office 365, but also with things coming out of Office 365 using things like the CASB integration. Again, with that CASB integration, allows us to put in a lot of oversight around Office 365. As I've described it, effectively, CASB is a buffer that sits around any cloud application and allows you to put in rules and compliance regulations and audits and everything to make sure that everything hits those same standards. And then finally, we can do threat detection and DLP and all of these things for all of the other cloud applications that are out there. I appreciate today's been very much talking about Office 365, but that's just because it's a very, very common one. It's certainly not the only one out there. And to be honest, everything that I've said today, I could have replaced the words Office 365 with Amazon Web Service or G Suite or Box or any of the other ones that are out there. Or I could have just been talking about your local environment. These things are just an extension of what you have there. So with that, thanks very much for your time. If you do have any questions, as Shona mentioned earlier, if you want to put those into the questions or the chats bar, and we can create those. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks everyone for joining us as well. So I do have a couple of questions come through, but I'd like to invite the audience to, put your questions in if there's anything you want to know about any of the points that Chris has raised, or also, any of the CASB solutions, any questions around that, or indeed any questions around, any particular weaknesses within Office 365 and services that you may want to understand how this can be implemented. So my first question to Chris is just some guidance on really where the person here wants to know where is Microsoft Office 365 security good, and what are the weak points? So what are, you mentioned bridging gaps. In Forcepoint's opinion, what gaps are there that do need to be bridged, and what's the role for the use case for doing that, and then what gaps should organizations and enterprises be bridging within the Microsoft internal security stack?
So I suspect that there's more to it than the ones I'm aware of, but the reality is I'm aware of the security gaps where we can plug them, to be honest. The big ones that I'm seeing, the first one that I became aware of was the Exchange Online piece. As I said, that's kind of like people's gateway into Office 365. Everyone seems to start with putting their Exchange online first and foremost. And we've seen so many customers who've previously used Forcepoint email protection, moved away because Office 365 effectively offers it for free, and then come back. Similarly, we've seen plenty of customers who've used competitive third-party solutions, go to Office 365, decide it's not sufficient, and then review the market and go to it. So I'd say that's probably one of the bigger ones. And being that spam and threats are on email are so ubiquitous, that really's got to be a high place to start. It's also, if you put like a cloud email piece in front of it, actually really quick and easy and effective, with very little work on your side. And I would say that one should be applicable to almost everybody. Certain people have less perceived risk on email, and that's fine. But as I said, it's common. We see so much malware and junk and really nasty stuff going across email. The next one is going to be a lot more subjective, because it really depends on how people interact with data. So there's so many customers. I speak a lot about DLP as part of my day job nowadays, and this is one for some people. It's absolutely critical and they can't live without it, and for others, they need it, but their requirements are quite basic. Maybe just personally identifiable information or credit card data, and then for others, they've got no use for it at all, or no perceived use for it at all is probably a better way of thinking about it. So that would be the next security gap. Office 365 has got DLP, and if your needs for a basic, it'll probably do the job. If, however, you wanted to be doing things a bit more complex, if you've got anything that you would think is, well, this data is unique to us, it's not going to cover it. And the third area I would say is kind of the more managing side of things, which is where the CASB comes into play. Yeah, there are controls in Office 365 about what administrators can and can't do, and what users can and can't do, and how they access it, but they're not that strong, is my understanding. You'll appreciate that my interactions with Office 365 tend to come from customers, so it may come across as a little bit biased because I only hear when people are unhappy with things. But being able to put in a standard makes a lot of sense. So I hope that answers that question.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. That's great. So I don't have any other questions at the moment. I'll just have a couple of seconds for anyone else to pop anything through. Thank you very much, Chris, for your time and your presentation. Thanks everyone for taking the time to attend today's session as well. I appreciate that, everyone's very busy and has busy schedules, so we do appreciate when you take the time to attend these sessions. As I said previously, I will make the recording available to you post-session, and also the slides available that Chris has put together, so you can share them internally. I don't have any further questions, so I'm just going to thank everyone for their time, and we'll wrap up now. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Thank you. Bye.